Hello. Today you can see I've brought my Kant with me. So it is going to be a philosophy video. One prompted by a little bit of an old story. So back in, I guess it would have been turn of November last year, a bill was introduced into the Ohio legislature by State Senator Bill DeMora. And the idea behind this bill was that whenever an allocated bottle of spirits was sold in one of the state liquor stores, it had to be opened before it left the premises. So an employee would, pop the cork, put a sticker on, and then it could go out with the customer. And the idea here, I mean, it's not a new idea, right? Like individual stores have been doing variations on this for a little while. But, sorry, one of the reasons I'm doing this today is I have a little bit of a scratchy throat. So the idea here is to combat bottle flipping because there are people who will go in and buy bottles, often with the help of some of the people behind the counter, buy bottles, not to drink them, but just to flip them for a big markup to other people. What does the opening the bottle in advance do? Well, the flippers rely on the people buying from them trusting that they're getting legit stuff. That's how this black market resale thing works, right? You have to trust your dealer. So if every bottle that the flipper is able to get has been opened already, that trust isn't really going to be there in the same way. And once flippers aren't going to be able to get the same amount of money, if anything at all, and they're going to stop doing it, and that means there's going to be more bottles available for normal people who just want to buy these, and buy a nice bourbon for themselves. And that's kind of like DeMora's intention here. I'm going to quote from the article. I'll put a link down below. He says, "I'm just trying to make it fair for all the people in Ohio who want to drink and enjoy these bourbons, to give them a fair chance and not to have a bunch of people who have no desire to drink it themselves flip it and make money." And so, it's old news, but I keep thinking about this because on the one hand, I can see lots of practical problems coming up with this approach. And to some extent, there's hints that maybe DeMora is aware of this. He also suggests maybe that you could have these things in timed lockers so that employees can't just, open them whenever they want. They don't necessarily know what's in there. But it's what's interesting to me, first off, is that this is an attempt. So maybe not the pragmatics of how this is supposed to work, but the fact that this is an attempt to control flipping and the secondary spirits resale market, which has gone completely out of control in general. This is the first time I've seen a legislative attempt to approach it beyond the fact that it's just illegal to do it anyways. We're going to talk less about the pragmatics. We can do that some other time maybe, or you can hit that up in the comments, and more about just the nature of the intention. And in the process, we're going to talk about moral dilemmas and which moral dilemmas I think are useful to talk about and which I think are not useful to talk about. And the process of that, also, why Kant is pretty useless, and it's a privilege to be useless, on the trolley problem. So let's get into this. I am going to pour myself a glass of Benchmark Full Proof. And here we go. Hopefully my voice will hold out while I get through this. Okay. Back when I was... I'm not going to keep this on screen. Back when I was still teaching philosophy. There are very few things that I disliked more than to have someone bring up the trolley problem, because inevitably it was in the middle of my trying to identify some nuanced kind of issue, and one of the students would drop this, and inevitably it would throw discussion completely off the rails. So I was never a fan of it. I don't like it. I will tell you why. So what is it? I mean, if you've ever watched The Good Place, or if you've ever seen internet memes before, you know what the trolley problem is. It's originally part of a thought experiment by Philippa Foot. Not even the whole thought experiment. It's like a little chunk of it that kind of has since taken on an ugly life of its own. And basically, the scenario is this. There is an out-of-control trolley, and a whole bunch of people, how many people? Doesn't really matter, are in danger, n+1 people. And they will certainly be killed. How do you know that they'll be killed? You just know, it's stipulated. Unless you, in some position, some control position or whatever, push a button or pull a lever or whatever to switch the tracks or something, and all of those people will be saved. Again, stipulated, for sure they'll be saved. But the price is that the trolley will then kill some innocent bystander on the side. How do you know it will definitely kill them? Again, you just know. You just know. You accept that. So there's the dilemma here. Do you let n+1 people die, or do you pull the lever or whatever and let and trolley this one guy to save that other group? So this is a scenario that it's been parodied by everyone as it should be. It has become a joke, as it absolutely should be. I support making jokes about this. But it's a scenario much beloved by a group that is called, and now apparently calls themselves, the consequentialists. They love this because normal people's intuitions a lot of the time is just to kind of look at it and say, well, geez, I guess the best thing to do if you want to save the most lives is to pull the dang lever and trolley that poor guy. That's and the consequentialists, kind of fist pump at that. Consequentialism, if you don't know it, is a sort of philosophical term of art, relatively recent, that is meant to be very, very broad. It's actually coming from Elizabeth Anscombe. There's a very famous paper. Seems like a weak word. It's more like a bomb that went off in the late 50s called Modern Moral Philosophy. Go read it. It is so much more rich than I can do justice to in this article. But it does introduce the term consequentialism, because part of what Anscombe wants to do with that paper is to point out that there is, despite apparent differences in the Anglophone English and to some extent American moral philosophy at the time, lots of differences, people going different ways. There is a deep commonality to it. So, and she names all of these as a result consequential. So, all the philosophical strands coming after basically Henry Sidgwick, but really also stretching back to like utilitarian, good old fashioned utilitarianism. And she says, and I'm going to quote. I couldn't find my Anscombe book. It's packed away in the basement somewhere. But I'm going to quote it anyways. She says, "Every one of the best-known English academic moral philosophers has put out a philosophy according to which, for example, it is not possible to hold that it cannot be right to kill the innocent as a means to any end whatsoever, and that someone who thinks otherwise is in error." To put that much more loosely, consequentialists are people who believe that there has to be a situation dire enough where the morally right thing to do is to kill an innocent person. which is exactly what the trolley problem is about, and they bring this up in order to kind of prove their point. Yeah, this is. Now, here's the thing about philosophical discussions: you have to have someone to discuss with. You need someone else occupying the chair opposite to you. Otherwise, it looks you can't be Clint Eastwood just talking to an empty chair. You need someone on the other side of this. You need someone who's going to argue, no. The best thing to do is to not pull the lever and let everyone die, and not kill not Trolley the one guy. You need someone to play that role, and not inevitably, but a lot of the time, the character drafted into that role is Immanuel Kant. Now, it's not really Immanuel Kant because, Kant is really complicated and difficult and very nuanced, and there's a ton of interpretive difficulties which make it super duper complicated. And also, it doesn't have to really be the real Kant because his job is to lose. Like, he is being drafted into this argument as a jobber. He is there to offer counter-argument that loses to the consequentialists to make their argument look better. So this is not Immanuel Kant proper. We're talking about the schmuck, stupid version of Immanuel Kant. Let's call him Schmemmanuel Schmont. What does Schmemmanuel Schmont think? Well, Schmont thinks that good intentions are the only thing that matters, which is, it's not even a half-truth. It's like a quarter true at most. Schmemmanuel Schmont thinks that there is a test you can run where you take your moral situation, all the empirical particulars, whatever your choice of action is, in all details, and plug it into the test, and it's going to spit out an answer that tells you if it's moral or not. Which is, there are actually Kantians who believe this. I think they're dead wrong. I think they're misreading the text. I don't think that's what's going on. Schmemmanuel Schmont, most relevantly, thinks that you must never use rational beings, like human beings, as means to an end. Any end, no matter how gosh darn good. And this is true. It gets more nuanced than that, of course, because it's Kant. But yeah, that one is actually true. So what does Schmont do presented with the trolley problem? Well, he walks up to it, he looks it over, and he says, well, golly gee, it looks like if I pull that lever and trolley the guy, I am using him as a means to an end, and that's not right. So what I got to do is to do nothing and let everyone die, and that's the moral course of action. And at that point, the consequentialist says, well done, Kant. You just let a whole bunch more people die than needed to. Great philosopher, huh? And then they all high-five each other, and Schmont sort of slinks off until the next time he's needed to lose to someone. I'm smelling this, and benchmark is better than it has any right to be. Yeah. I'm going to be honest, just as an interjection, when this stuff is around, how much do you really need your allocated B-tax? Anyhow, this is a grotesque misunderstanding of Kant's philosophy. And I'm not going to go into his moral thought to the nines. We don't have time today for that. But I do want to insist that the first move Kant makes in moral philosophy is to distinguish between what he calls pure morality and sort of morality as applied on the ground with all the sort of empirical details that it has to take. He calls this moral anthropology. And it's important. You can't do without it. But it's not what he wants to focus on first. He thinks that when you're dealing with pure morality, you have to abstract from the circumstances, from the empirical particulars, and just look at the formal moral principles. Now, how do I put this? Basically, what you should be willing is, I'm vastly oversimplifying. What one ought will is what ought to happen, what ought to be the case. One ought to be trying to realize that. Now, if you kind of dig deep enough into that, that looks like trying to will what one would legislate kind of collectively in an ideal world of ends, so a kingdom of ends. But we don't need to go into that right now. Just think of it as you are willing to realize what ought to happen. And regardless of the empirical details, the rules operating, what ought to happen? You come to the trolley problem with that in mind, and it's just you look at it and okay, there's a lot of rational beings in danger, actual danger or potential danger. What ought to happen? What ought the outcome to be? Don't think about this too long, because the answer is everyone should get out of there. Like, no one should die. No one should even get hurt. Everyone ought to survive this experience. And therefore, what we ought to will is to get everyone out of there alive, to save everyone. And you hear that, and you say, wow, that's profound, Mr. Kantian moral philosopher. Of course we ought, it would be nice if we could save everyone. It would be nice if everyone got out of there, but that's, ruled out by what we're stipulating in the situation. So it doesn't matter. Of course it matters. Of course, it's like the only thing that matters. There is, when you talk about Kant's moral principles, Kantian moral principles, you're not talking, although I know there are Kantians who will say this, and I think they're missing the bus. It's not a way to resolve all moral disagreements, all moral dilemmas. There's always going to be those, because the world is a mess. Empirical circumstances are always complicated, but they give you something like a bedrock upon which we can even have moral discussions in the first place. Like, don't think that moral principles in this sort of pure abstract fashion that Kant wants to have them can't result in radically different sort of value systems, broadly speaking, radically different sorts of societies, because they can. Like, different ways of achieving those ends or approaching those ends are going to look very different depending on the circumstances. But the fact that we can have debates, what the principle gives you is the fact that you can have debates about them. And there's a certain, I don't know, noble stupidity, put it that way, to Kantian moral imperatives. No one ought kill anybody. No one even ought die before their time. No one should steal. Everyone should try to help each other. Everyone should try to make themselves better. All this sounds very naive, and that's kind of the point. And it's the sort of thing you want to skip past because you're not 8 years old in order to talk about sexier things. But you can't just forget about them, because they're the basis upon which we can have discussions about the sexier things. Anyway, so the Kantian approach is, well, the moral choice is to try to save everyone. And I think in an actual concrete emergency situation, that's what someone of goodwill, a good person, would actually try to do. Lots of people in danger. some other bystanders around, you got to try to save everyone. Like it, people may have vastly different ways of trying to do that, depending on their skill sets, depending on their resources, what they know. One person may try to get like an impromptu team together. Another person may try to slow the trolley down, pull the lever, but try to get the other guy off of there somehow. But the point is, like, you will to save everyone. And, we should talk about the willing thing, because I think that's important. One of the bugbears of common understandings of Kant would be sort of the well-meaning fool, or even like the guy who's like, at least I tried. I gave it the good old college go. And they again, the consequentialists are going to look at that and say, well, your good intentions aren't doing very much, you idiots. So that's the schmont image of like the moral agent is well-meaning fool, or the I gave it a try guy. Those people are not people of goodwill, because they aren't really willing. Okay, there's a paragraph on Akademie Ausgabe, Volume 4, page 394. This is in the groundwork of the Metaphysics of Morals. It's a super important paragraph. I'm only going to pull out like an aside Kant makes it to explain himself. And he says, willing, the goodwill, willing, is not a mere wish. It's not just wishing that the good result should happen. Not as a mere wish, but as the summoning of all means insofar as they're under our control. Willing does not mean wishing. It doesn't even mean trying. Trying is too weak. Willing means throwing yourself with everything you got at the realization of the end you intend. That is what willing is. And the means thing is important. It's whatever you got, but beyond that, it's also like means to get better means. Like, one thing to understand is part of Kantian moral projects don't look like, most of the time, like sort of individual pointillistic moral actions. You do the good thing here, and then here, and then here, and then here. They look much more like, extended projects to bring about a better world, a world that ought to be. And in the course of those projects, you're going to need to improve your means. You're going to need to learn, to make yourself better, to make yourself stronger, to assemble better resources, more money, get your, strengthen your will. Kant is very, very big on that. All of this stuff, there is an ought implies can going on in Kant consistently, but it means if there's an ought, you better darn well find the can. And that is what a lot of kind of moral life looks like, finding better means to achieve what you're supposed to do. So the reason why I gave it a try guy and, well-meaning idiot guy are not really the kinds of agents Kant wants. They aren't really people of goodwill. It's because they aren't really willing, because they aren't really finding all the means they can to drag a better reality into existence. I mean, so the funny thing about the paradox of the Kantian moral picture is Kant himself wants to insist that moral worth really is just in the willing itself. He will say that. This very paragraph, that's where he really plants his flag. But if you look at people of goodwill who have that moral worth, they really care about getting results. They are laser focused on realizing what ought to happen. And so they look a lot like consequentialists. They look like people who only care about results, except they have hard rails. They have hard borders that they will not cross. If I go up to a person of goodwill and I'm like, hey, there's a lot of old people we could rob and we could use their resources to better achieve our ends, they'd be like, that's not who we are. We're not going to do that. Because there's a sense of if you're trying to realize a better world, a moral world, you cannot do it on the bodies of your victims, because that's not a moral world. That's not the world it ought to be. Anyways, all this is to say, what we would expect, what Kant would say the goodwill would do, and what we'd expect from a decent person in an actual trolley problem scenario kind of thing, is that they would really try to save everyone. And it may not work out. Like, people could get hurt. People could die. And the person of goodwill is not going to have a good night. Like, that stuff hurts. And, I'm like, if you go up to them and you're like, hey, at least you had good intentions, at least you gave it a shot, they will bite your head off. Because they will say, screw my intentions, screw my giving it a shot. People are dead. And they will, because again, like, it's about realizing what ought to happen. And if you don't get that, you should feel, I mean, you should ask yourself, what could I have done better? What if I were faster? What if, and so on and so on and so on. And you learn and you try to do better for next time. Put a pin in that. You try to do better for next time. You can be angry at yourself. You can be disappointed in yourself. And we, as bystanders, can very well also be angry or disappointed at these folks if they didn't, achieve their moral aim. Because maybe we thought they could have done better. But, and this is an important, super duper important distinction. I'm going to have more bourbon. I don't think we would be contemptuous of them. I don't think we would be disgusted by them. There's a distinction between pragmatic failure and moral failure. These people might have, the person of goodwill might have failed pragmatically, or we can be angry about that, but we're not going to be morally disgusted by them. I can tell you who I think I would be morally disgusted by is if I came up to someone afterwards who's been in charge of the situation and they said, well, I read my Schmanuel Schmont, and he said that it was not right to pull the lever and use that other guy as a means. So it was the morally right thing to do to just sit back on my hands and let a whole bunch of people die. And by the way, I slept like a baby last night because it was a morally right thing to do. Or conversely, if the person said, well, I did my consequentialist calculations and I realized the morally right thing to do was to pull the lever and trolley that guy. And you're welcome, by the way. I think if we heard this from someone in like a real concrete situation, either one of those options, we would say, what is wrong with you? Why do you take human lives like so lightly that you can treat it as if you did, as if what you did was the morally right thing to do and claim that? We sort of, I think we would intrinsically recognize bourbon, smooth. We would intrinsically recognize that there's just something deeply wrong about thinking that way. And I'm not saying, by the way, that there's not real situations that are horrific and require like some kind of horrific choice. That's the state of emergency, the state of war. Actually, if I can go back to Anscombe for a second. one of the funniest footnotes I've ever read is in Modern Moral Philosophy, where later on, where she talks about giving a draft to this thing in a workshop or something, and apparently someone asked her, well, what do you do if, for example, the choice is between, I don't think it's killing an innocent guy, I think it's like convicting an innocent guy of a crime he didn't commit, something like that. If it's between that and a nuclear bomb war, like that was the scenario presented to Elizabeth Anscombe in a workshop. Very consequentialist kind of scenario, and her answer is very interesting. But I think, especially in the context of the rest of the essay, what she's objecting to is the idea that one of those alternatives is the morally right one. So that something about that is an appropriate label to ascribe to one of those two choices, or in the trolley problem, to letting a whole bunch of people die, or to, offing one guy to save a whole bunch of others. To say one of those is morally right. In fact, a lot of that essay is about kind of trying to massage that kind of language out of moral philosophy, because she gets kind of disgusted with it. But I think the brain rot of the trolley problem and associated scenarios, because part of the fun is coming up with variations on this stuff. The brain rot, the psychological poison of this thing, is you hang around with it long enough and you start to think that these kinds of scenarios, the state of emergency, the state of war, are normal, are acceptable, and that there is a morally right answer, and that morally right answer is sort of, I don't know, the most clever or the most prudent, as Kant would say, because you can find cleverer, more prudent, or more useful answers in a state of war. Of course you can. But you cannot, to make the jump to say that is the morally right one, that has issues, I think. So, more bourbon. There is actually some mention of Kant in Anscombe's paper, and I will just say I think it could have been a deeper engagement. Let's leave it at that. Anyhow, so that's the problem with trolley problem approaches, and I think if you think through Kant, he helps you understand why they're not that helpful. I mean, one of the weird things about this is the response to the trolley problem in a real situation should be something like, let's make sure this never happens again. What do we do to fix the damn trolley system? What do we do to improve trolley safety standards? And I've had consequentialist friends, and they really often think of themselves as very grounded, practical people, but when you start posing them, they are deeply uninterested in the question of, well, how do you start fixing the darn trolley system if this is the problem? Because I don't think they find those kinds of questions interesting. I'm just going to close Kant for now. But it's a funny thing about Kantians, because once they get old, they see, the Kantians I like anyways, once they get old, they start to become institutionalist. They start, and this is in Kant too as well, because you read, he has these formal writings on ethics, which you have to read whenever you do Philosophy 101. And really, I think most people just kind of, their eyes glaze over and then they go read the SparkNotes summary to tell them what Kant is supposed to be saying there, and usually it's the wrong thing. But alongside the formal moral philosophical text is discussions of politics, of policy, of institution building, of correcting the world to eliminate things like war, because the state of emergency and the state of war are horrific the very fact that that morality has left the building in those scenarios is an indication that they should be marginalized, that we should try to get them out of the world so much as possible. That in itself should be a moral project. Anyways, and even in Kant's metaphysics of morals, like there's the moral philosophy and the institution building policy stuff is all wrapped into itself. It's all like right by itself. I'm sorry, I'm rambling a little bit here. What do I want to say? Kantians, to go back to the means thing and the willing thing, begin to realize that the means are used to bring about the end that you want in moral willing. Means aren't necessarily a private thing. In fact, most of the time, they shouldn't be, and they aren't. A lot of the time, means are public. They are available to everyone, or at least to a wider group of people. They can be passed around. They can be passed through generations. Think of science, for example. Science is many things, but among other things, it is a means for, making for a better world. And it is a means that can be sort of taken up by everyone who takes the time to pick up the science, to learn the science. So a lot of what Kantians do is they start to focus on institution building towards improving these kind of public means that we have available to bring about a better world and to eliminate, to make people happier and better and smarter and to eliminate emergencies and wars and all kinds of bad stuff. I meant to make this more nuanced and academic, but I'm just throwing this off at this point. All kinds of bad stuff. We're going to try to we try to eliminate that from the world through our institutions. The problem is institution building is not free. Institution building takes time and it takes resources, and that tends to run headlong into a different kind of moral dilemma, which I think is far more pressing and far more interesting than trolley problem kinds of stuff. And if I can try to summarize the second dilemma, I would put it like this. When and to what extent is it morally right to mildly inconvenience the privileged? So not use them as means, but kind of put a cap on their capabilities a little bit. Step on their toes a little bit, maybe, but no more than that. Mildly inconvenience the privileged if it is going to bring about considerable benefit to lots of people, or maybe to everyone. That's an interesting question. And it always ends up being a tricky question in context. And you can make this harder. You can also ask, when is it right to say mildly inconvenience everyone in order to greatly improve the lot of maybe a smaller underprivileged group? That's also interesting. But I'm going to focus on that first version, because when you're trying to build institutions to make stuff better, the privileged, if they're not outright opposed, often see no point in it because, they are where they are because of the situation as it currently stands. In fact, they might even prefer if the situation as it currently stands were more like the way it is. So then you're presented with this dilemma. If you want to kind of move forward with your institution building, you have to step on their toes a little bit. When is that okay? How far is that okay? How far do you want to go? The example Kant brings up in the Metaphysics of Morals, which is the classic example, is taxation. Right? I have another personal favorite, which is personal debt. I mean, say if everyone is, not everyone, but many people are just barely treading water over the sea of debt to the point where if they have like one bad day, they are pulled down into the depths forever. And to the point that it's strangling growth, it's strangling opportunity. In that situation, is it morally right to order a write-down of the debts? What debts? How much should you write them down? Do you throw a carrot to the creditors for doing this? Do you throw anything to the people who maybe aren't getting as much of a debt write-down or any benefit at all from this? How do you manage this? It gets tricky. It gets really difficult. But I do think this kind of dilemma is, how do I put this, the most pressing and maybe the most common dilemma we are forced with, that is forced upon us today. And we don't think about it nearly enough because we're thinking about, a lot of the time, what is the least number of people we can throw under a bus in order to achieve our ends? And I don't want to talk about this too much more before getting back to the point, but I will say, I think if you made a Venn diagram of, on the one hand, people who think that it is morally right, given a sufficiently dire situation, to let a whole bunch of people die or to trolley someone or trolley a couple of hundred people or a couple of thousand, a million, if the situation is dire enough, and that's the morally right thing to do. On the one hand, versus the class of people who wants to say, no, it is never, ever, ever morally acceptable to limit the freedoms of the privileged. And, oh, by the way, how dare you call them privileged? They deserve to be where they need to be. That intersection, I'm sure, has some very, very interesting people in it. But to go back to this initial discussion, the bill in the Ohio legislature, which realistically probably isn't going anywhere, but there's an idea there. Think about this idea, the bill, for a second, and the intention. And you realize it's kind of a perfect, it's a case example of this kind of dilemma, this second kind of dilemma. Let me read again what Senator DeMora says. I'm just trying to make it fair for all the people in Ohio who want to drink and enjoy these bourbons, to give them a fair chance. It's not about putting a bottle of Elmer T. Lee in their hands, or giving them some blends, or even letting them buy some blends. It's about giving them a little bit. It's about making the process fair. That is the intention. Give them a fair chance of getting a nice bourbon. And what? So how do you achieve that? Well, you mildly inconvenience the flippers and the people they're flipping to by, popping the bottles, poisoning the well of their supply of stuff to sell. That is the intention, and to some extent, at that level, I think it's right on. I think it's a good intention. Now you can start to ask questions about the feasibility of this thing. Just for example, what about collateral damage from this? If Grandpa wants a bottle of blends for his birthday, he may not be super happy if it shows up open with a sticker on top. Grandpa may not understand that. Also, problems of, is it going to do what it says it's going to do? I mean, this is already an illegal activity, right? So, it's perfectly valid to ask, well, aren't the flippers going to go deal with the folks behind the counter who are helping them out and handing them, bottles and bags and things in the back? Aren't these... they're already performing an illegal operation. Do we really think that they wouldn't find some way to make sure the bottles remain intact? And also, our store, how do you enforce this? Our store employee is going to pop bottles, take the 2 minutes to pop these bottles open when there's a line literally stretching out the door and around the block to try to get these allocated bourbons. there's a lot of problems with this. I think a lot of them stem from the fact that I'm going to make a modest proposal. Maybe the scale of the proposal is just a little bit too small. This is such a bourbon-y bourbon. I mean, here's what I mean. Why are there flippers? Why has the black market, resale market of these allocated bourbons, why has it gone so completely crazy? Is it because, families want to give grandpa his birthday blends? Maybe to some extent. Is it because, lawyers win a big case, and they want to burn some money? I mean, yeah, maybe that could be happening. But I think there's an answer that I've heard from many, many smart people. I'm going to read a quote from Whiskey Sponge. This is Angus. I forget his last name. Angus, who helps Surge with Whiskey Fund these days. And he's answering the question, like, why is whiskey so darn expensive? Specifically, it's about why are independent casks so expensive. But he does some hands raising, and he says this, which I think is a very good summation. He says, and I quote, "It's the fault, all the pricing stuff, the craziness, including the black market, I would say. It's the fault of all these flash-in-the-pan, cask investment, snake oil peddling, charlatan liquid gold, asset portfolio capital, 1,000% return, anonymous, bad word. They're spoiling things far more than any bottle flippers, and they should F off." It's the investors. So if you're grandpa or if you're a lawyer who just won a case, you're going to put in some effort to try to find a decent price. You don't want to pay it the stupid $300 for blends or whatever the stupid pricing is. Know who doesn't mind paying silly prices for stuff? Investors. The absolutely stupidly rich, and the people working for them, making money for them. If they spend X amount of dollars for a bottle, and it's way too much money, that's good for them because it means that the assets they already own, the number of bottles of that they already own, instantly have a value of X times the number of bottles. So they've made money, and that's great. What is happening, and I hear this from everyone who knows what's going on, is people, the very, very, very rich need a place to park their money. And one of the places you can do that is, bottles of booze, bottles of whiskey. And they are the ones scooping a lot of this stuff up. And that drives up prices, and that encourages flippers. So if you want to, as Senator DeMora says, make it fair for Ohioans, give them a better chance at this process, wouldn't you make a deeper institutional change? For example, wouldn't you try to make the cleanest and most effective way to combat the flipping would be to just change the economic state, make mildly inconvenience the very rich and the investment folks who work for them, to make it more difficult or less beneficial to dump their money into assets like whiskey. That would reduce the demand. That would reduce the flipping. I'm just saying. It's just a thought. Anyways, so that's most of what I wanted to say today. I've had this running around in my head for a good month and a half now, so just wanted to get it out there. Post your discussions down below. If you can think of better ways to combat bottle flipping, or if you want to talk about Kant, have at it. Have fun. Thanks thanks for watching. I'm going to enjoy the last of my benchmark here. And cheers.